Alien Earth Episode 3 has a lot of Easter eggs to those alien movies that nobody actually likes, so we're here to break those down for you. Welcome back to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Alien Earth Episode 3. Now, before we get into the Easter eggs from this episode, I want to go back just to Episodes 1 and 2 and talk about the Easter eggs that we missed. The first of which is the dog that we were jump scared with in Episode 1, which is a Rottweiler, the same breed of dog that we saw the Xenomorph erupt from back in Alien 3. Joe and Maisie's dad was also played by Noah Hawley, the director and creator of this series. And he chose Ice Age as the movie to link Joe and Maisie because it's the one movie that his own kid always wanted to watch no matter what. Now, the ship also included the use of the semiotic standard, which are basically these fancy warning labels that are used like hieroglyphic symbols and warning labels that were designed for use aboard all commercial transstellar utility lifter and heavy elemental transport spacecraft. And we can see those all over the Mazzio. But now let's dive into Episode 3. So we open with a shot of the Xenomorph's body as we see Ridley Scott's classic intro once again. Now this time, instead of slowly panning over its head, we get a broader shot of its body lying down in a similar pose that it takes after its death as it's being wheeled into Neverland. However, it still managed to keep its head intact during the intro. Then we pick up right where we left off with Wendy chasing after her brother, using her synthetic senses to track him via sound. Meanwhile, the rest of the Lost Boys and Kirsch are packing up the new specimens. Now we see that Curly is holding some kind of worm-like specimen, which could be a chest burster or even another specimen that we haven't seen quite yet. We also see the space ticks from last episode, which are fully engorged with blood, and even show them releasing some of the excess blood in their chamber.
Hey, how you doing after that big month? You checking in, you doing okay?
Dude, not bad. I mean, you guys know July was one of our busiest months ever, with Superman and the Fantastic Four both coming out a couple weeks apart, and stressful times like that used to really get to me, and I would rely on my bad oral fixation habits. Like for me, it's squishing one eye really hard, or licking my lips, or biting my tongue. So instead, I replace my facial tics with Fume. They're the sponsor of this video. Now, I'm sure you guys have your own bad habits that you would like to quit, especially in social situations when you feel anxious or just bored. For me, Fume has been a game changer. Fume does not use smoke or vapor, just natural flavored air that gives you something to reach for without the chemicals. Studies have shown that quitting a bad habit cold turkey is actually really bad for you. So I like having something to reach for when I feel that urge. This is a great alternative to those harmful habits. Guys, this is an award-winning flavored air device that does not use combustion, and it's not even electronic. You can use it anywhere. No smoke, no vapor, no chemicals, just natural flavored air. See, it has these plant-based cores that just taste great. In fact, they just introduced mango, my new favorite flavor. It's bolder than past flavors I've tried, and I recommend it if you want to switch things up. These are non-toxic flavors and a guilt-free alternative with natural ingredients. But you guys know, I also love this magnetic, fidget-friendly design that makes this incredibly satisfying sound. Guys, more than 500,000 people have already added Fume to their daily routine, and I totally get why. It's simple, satisfying, and doesn't come with any of the downsides of your old bad habits. And right now, if you order the Journey Pack using my code ScreenCrush, you will get a free Fume topper. It's this rubber piece on the end so you can chew on the end of it. It's great for oral fixation anxiety. So if you've been thinking about changing your habits, I think Fume is the perfect first step. Go to tryfume.com/ScreenCrush or scan the QR code on screen right now to grab yours today. Now, back to what I was saying. Kirsch is downloading more data on the specimens, and if you slow the scene down, you can actually read the files, which gives us a little bit more information on the T. ocellatus and the D. plumicare, which is a lot less cool than the name that we gave it in our last breakdown. Now, there is a lot to read through here, and most of the information on the T. ocellatus in particular is stuff that we already knew from watching the last episode. The page details how the creature removes its host's eye and hijacks the nervous system to control its body. However, the files do reveal a lot about the D. plumicare, which is a carnivorous plant that uses enzymes to not only detect prey around it, but also to immobilize it with its pistol.
The plant has a gun. Get down, person!
Not that kind of pistol gun. The pistol is the center of a flower, also known as a carpel, which is typically used for plant reproduction. So it's fitting that Hollywood used this part of the plant as its primary weapon, continuing the themes of sexual predation that we have seen throughout the entire Alien franchise, which means that the creature was eyeballing our synthetic friends last episode, but its enzymes are able to sense that they are synthetic. Now we also see a very similar kind of plant in the Predator Badlands trailer, so it's possible that this species could even come from the Yacha homeworld. Remember, in that same trailer, we did see trucks from Weyland-Yutani, further linking these two universes together. And we also see the cast of the Lost Boys much more fleshed out in this episode. After running into the T. ocellatus last episode, Nibs is starting to question her own mortality and the Prodigy propaganda that she's been fed alongside it, while Slightly has his own existential crisis, as we later see with Morrow. We also get a lot more of Curly, who seems to be the biggest team player among amongst the Lost Boys. She's not only trying to convince everyone that there's nothing to worry about, but also striving to meet her max potential and win Boy Cavalier's favor. Now this puts her in direct conflict with the crisis that Nibs is currently having. She starts deconstructing Neverland's entire metaphor when she says,
"How come Peter Pan? Why didn't we get to choose? We're not even all boys, we're half girls."
Ending with,
"How come Wendy gets to be Wendy?"
which really sticks with Curly and pushes her to meet with Boy later. And speaking of Mr. Cavalier, we then see him order Kirsch and the Lost Boys to bring back the experiments. Now clearly, he doesn't care about the consequences of essentially stealing trillions of dollars worth of research from Weyland-Yutani, which is interesting given that we find out about Prodigy later in the episode. And then we turn back to Wendy, and she's finally able to echolocate Joe in the back of what seems like a modern-day semi-truck. Now the scenes here really capture just how well Hawley has translated the look of the Alien franchise to this FX series. Not only is the parking garage desolate and soaking wet like almost everything else we see in Alien, but the stark pops of yellow we see in the parking garage emulate the use of yellow throughout the franchise. The semiotic standard uses yellow as a warning, like a wet floor sign, but of course, the most iconic use of yellow has to be the mech that Ripley used to kill the Alien Queen in Aliens. Now this mech was called the P-5000, which features the exact same black and yellow striped lines that we see all over the parking garage. Now Wendy is able to find her brother in the back of a meat truck, which is fitting because the Xeno is clearly saving him for later.
Wait, why didn't the Xeno kill him like it did the others?
Well, James Cameron established the aliens, the Xenomorphs.
They don't kill you!
Their primary function is to find new hosts to feed to the facehuggers and then spawn more drones. They only resort to killing their prey when threatened. Clearly, Hawley's Xenomorphs are much more aggressive, but it's possible that it was just looking for the optimal host, and that our boy Joe just happens to be that. The show continues to put Joe in situations where he's completely helpless, and this continues that trend. As much as he always wanted to be Mr. October like his father wanted him to be, he's perpetually limited since he's essentially owned by Prodigy. And this is why he takes every chance he gets to take charge, like when he tries to put himself in front of Wendy when they first peek their heads into the container. As the drone pokes its head into the container, it stops moving, which suggests that it's attracted to motion. While the Xenomorphs are highly evolved predators with seemingly every bioweapon in the book. The one thing they don't have, though, are eyes. Still, we clearly see that they have no problem locking onto their prey throughout the series. Now, given that we know that they use sound to communicate, it's possible that they also use some sort of echolocation to track their prey, and can only actually see their prey when they move. Now, this would mirror how apex predators in the natural world, like lions, sharks, and owls, who also rely on motion to detect their prey. Some animals adapt to this by freezing in place and blending into their environment, just like Morrow did when the Xeno popped up behind him last episode, which could be why it spared his life. Now, the Xeno decides to climb on top of the container when Wendy stabs it with her paper cutter, which is somehow durable enough to cut through steel. Now, as the drone thrashes, it tosses the storage container over, throwing Wendy out of the hole created by the acid, just like the chest burster erupting from somebody's body. Now, this finally gives Joe a chance to step up, but when he does, he ends up getting ambushed and impaled by the alien's tail. Just as he's about to get a face of Xeno kisses, Wendy hooks the Xeno's tongue and throws it like it's today's fresh catch. Now, I feel like we've seen a Xeno hooked like this before, but I actually can't quite place where. However, we did see Ripley rip out a Xenomorph's tongue in Revelations before giving it to Annalie as
Souvenir.
and we see Wendy snag a souvenir of her own here as well. Now, the plan to trap the Xenomorph in a container also feels like a nod to Alien 3, in which their primary strategy was to trap the Xenomorph in an impenetrable container and melt it with lead. Now, Wendy gets trapped in the cage with the Xeno, forcing Joe into yet another helpless situation while he tries to hotwire the doors back open. By the time he gets inside, he's lost so much blood that he passes out next to his sister. And this is where we turn back to Slightly, who's still guarding the ovomorphs, which is a fancy word for xenomorph eggs. He discovers the husk of a face hugger, holding it up and across from his face, just like the one we saw in the original film. He reunites with Smee, showcasing a bit of their playground dynamic before Morrow crashes the party. Now, it's interesting to see how the Lost Boys aren't afraid of Morrow, even at gunpoint. Of course, they know objectively that their bodies can survive a gunshot, but just seconds ago, they were gossiping about how terrifying the monsters they've seen on the Mazzio are, which is a great way to show how artificial their fear actually is. They're afraid of the concept of monsters, even if they're not a direct threat to them objectively, which is why Kirsch has to remind them,
Fear is for animals.
You are not animals.
because they're children who were taught to be afraid of monsters. However, they're completely unfazed by guns, which is either by the design of their programming, or they've simply become desensitized to them to the point that they no longer fear guns on a conceptual level. Morrow catches on to this pretty quickly, which is why he specifically uses the term monsters as he educates them on the Xenomorph's life cycle. Then he hooks himself into the download and deletes the remaining files off the Mazzio and starts sweating profusely, which not only shows how much physical strain cyborgs take on when compared to synthetics like Kirsch, but also it makes them all the more alien since everything else in this franchise is also extremely always wet. We also see him yet again show resentment toward his own humanity after Slightly asks him,
You a robot? Wouldn't that be nice to be all machine instead of what I am?
he also asks them this,
What would you do? Could you harm others or allow them to be harmed? Could you follow those orders?
which is a trick question since synthetics can't be programmed to harm humans. Even the ones we see in the colonial marines are not allowed in combat. Now, there are a few circumstances where synthetics have been programmed to harm others, but in most, if not all cases, they're doing so completely illegally and on direct orders from the company. They cannot choose to kill someone, at least not of their own free will. So essentially, he's asking them a question to prove just how synthetic they are, similar to the way Kirsch has been doing with Wendy in the past 2 episodes. And this is one of the first instances we see of the cyborg being set up as a mirror of Kirsch, and it makes free will the distinguishing factor between synthetics and humans. His curiosity is piqued even further after Slightly lets it slip that they have parents, leading him to plant some kind of bug on the side of Slightly's neck that he uses to communicate with them later in the episode when they're interrupted by Kirsch. He asks,
Are you the parent? Excuse me?
and while he's technically not their parent, he's clearly become a sort of father figure to them despite his lack of warmth or empathy.
Yeah, I can relate.
Now, after a quick standoff, Morrow makes a jump for it before becoming Xenobait, which takes us to yet another Blade Runner-esque shot of New Siam, filled with the polluted skies and brightly illuminated billboards as the rest of the Lost Boys and Prodigy's private military corps make their way back to the Neverland Research Center with the newly acquired specimens. Now, as Joe's unconscious body passes by, we can actually spot a walrus tattoo on his arm, which explains Wendy's stuffed walrus that she's always carrying around with her. But it also makes the fact that Dr. Sylvia gifted it to her back in episode 1 all the more interesting. She knows these kids on an intimate level, enough to give them specific toys to make them feel more at home. So it seems to come from a place of empathy, as she's clearly taking everything that's happened to Wendy personally, going so far as to call herself,
I'm a guardian.
now this calls back yet again to the motherhood elements that are such a core fundamental part of every movie in this series past the original film. She sees the hybrids as actual human beings, while Boy sees them as assets, which is why he seems more frustrated than concerned when he finally hears about Wendy's condition, almost as if he's angry that she's so fragile. And then we get our best look at the unnamed beetle creature as Boy visits the new specimens in the lab. Now the beetle is forming a cocoon, or resin, similar to the hive resin that we saw in Cameron's Aliens. But once again, we see Boy's hubris when he compares his stolen discovery to finding an undiscovered country. It would make sense that he would admire imperialism because he didn't really discover anything, he just stole it. After getting a little bit too close to an ovomorph, Kirsch pushes him out of the room. Now when Kirsch fills Boy in on all the details of how xenomorphs work, he finishes with,
Proto-creatures must have gestated inside a human host.
Like you.
it's not particularly surprising that Kirsch would try to shame Boy for being human, given how much of a synthetic supremacist he is. But it does show an emotional response that is uncharacteristically human and could even be seen as him punching back after Boy criticized his capabilities earlier.
I thought you were supposed to be better than a man, but all I'm hearing are excuses.
Then we get a glimpse at just how little privacy the Lost Boys have in Neverland when they're visited by Boy's assistant Adam, who interrogates them about their confrontation with the cyborg. He continues to belittle them and treat them like children, despite the company constantly trying to reassure them of the opposite in literally every other situation. They're using the children's ignorance to their own advantage, stripping every bit of privacy they have. Not only are they recording everything they see, but we even see cameras in the back of the room filming them while they're just relaxing, and even a one-way mirror where Kirsch can watch them up close without them knowing. And we get yet another Blade Runner inspired shot showcasing the massive wealth divide between the elite and the working class in New Siam, where we rendezvous with Morrow once again. He steals food and eats like an animal because even the act of sitting down and eating a meal is clearly something he sees as being human. He snags a phone to call HQ, and when he does, he uses the security code 871. This is the same code used in the anime Sword Art Online, which used code 871 to prevent its digital characters from breaking the rules and the manufactured world. We finally get some follow-up from Curly as she reports back to Boy about their mission, to which he initially replies with,
Sent Wendy on a mission.
But she got broken.
which shows her not only exerting a small sense of artificial superiority, but also shows how much more accepting she is of her synthetic side when compared to the rest of the Lost Boys. She reiterates this again after Boy tells her that Wendy is his favorite because she was the first replying with,
"My dad always threw the first pancake in the trash."
which is a pretty smart quip from a robot with a child's brain, arguing how she's an improvement. That said, she also shows clear signs of being a kid, making poop jokes and asking as many questions as possible. Even if she chose the name Curly, she's clearly Tinkerbell.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Curly in Peter Pan is known for getting into trouble, as she stated earlier in the episode, but now she's acting like a serious teacher's pet. She wants someone to believe in her so she can feel significant, just like Tinkerbell, who needed everyone around her to believe in fairies or she would disappear forever. She's clearly seeking validation, even going so far as learning French just to impress him.
Je m'appelle Claude.
Je t'appelle Blue.
And it's not lost on Boy, and this gives us a lot deeper insight into his headspace, especially when he tells her what makes a Prodigy special, saying,
What makes them geniuses is the fact that they're children.
Showing how his obsession with youth goes far beyond his love for Peter Pan. He sees youth as a strength, as limitless potential, which not only explains why he chose to use children for his experiments, but why he acts so childish himself. He isn't simply immature, but rather he sees youth as superiority. And then we transition to a much more eerie scene where Morrow uses the implant that he managed to stick on slightly to beam the phone call straight to his brain. He does so from a grimy public computer inside a kinky sex club. Now behind him, we can see people getting flogged, and at times the silhouettes even resemble a xenomorph attacking. The browser tab he uses looks straight out of Windows 98, which makes this entire scene feel like a dark nod to the AIM chat rooms of the 1990s.
Wait, what's that?
See, at a time before cell phones, this used to be the closest people could get to talking to strangers online rather than subscribing to channels like ours. Now this also, unfortunately, created online predators who use the space to exploit the innocence of children, pretending to be just one of them and befriending them, just like we see Morrow have to do when he says,
Will you be my friend?
And then several articles appeared after he searched for Prodigy, most of which are off-topic tidbits or things we already know. The first covers a car crash the boy was involved in at 15 while taking driving lessons. The last article covers his choice to move Prodigy's offices to an undisclosed location, likely referencing the Neverland Research Center. The second article is the one that he actually clicks into, which talks about the triumvirate becoming the Five.
Did you say what now?
A triumvirate is a structure where three entities share control. In this case, three companies, Weyland-Yutani, Threshold, and Dynamic. Now when he clicks into the article, we learn that Prodigy and another corporation named Lynch were both brought into this triumvirate and then ceded land in North America and Southeast Asia to do so. We also see the end of the article just before he closes it, which shows that Weyland-Yutani was one of the main holdouts in the deal, and they felt threatened by Prodigy for a number of reasons, and clearly that tension is still very much there. However, the third article is the most interesting. It talks about the release of his new android, but the last lines read, Boy Cavalier has indicated that the progress made came as a direct result of throwing himself into his grief after the death of his, and then it cuts off there.
Jeez, that's a heck of a cliffhanger, person.
It absolutely is, but now we know that he's lost someone, more than likely one of his parents, which would certainly explain his Peter Pan syndrome. And that said, he's pretty apathetic towards absolutely anyone who isn't himself or one of his creations, which leads me to believe that whatever grief he went through may not be entirely genuine, but only time can tell. As he leaves the console and exits the club, we can see several scenes playing on in the background, including a couple playing on a chain of spiderwebs, further reiterating the theme of sexual predation. Back in Neverland, we can see that Nibs is starting to see through Prodigy's facade. We see her dramatically staring at herself in the mirror before touching the mirror, which at first simply seems like she's having an identity crisis. But if you look at her finger, there is no gap between her fingers, which means that the mirror in front of her is a two-way mirror, just like the one that Kirsch was watching the boys from earlier. And then she touches her eye in the same way because she knows that even if she escapes this room, Prodigy is still watching her every move through her eyes. It's also linked back to the T-Oculus, which, as we said earlier, controls its subjects through the eye. She's starting to question if she actually has any control in her life at all, or if she's just another corpse for Prodigy to control, just like the T-Oculus. Now the eye metaphor continues as we see a shot of her with her childhood face overlaid on top of her robot face, appearing as if she has a third eye.
Like Doctor Strange.
Exactly. Now the opening of a third eye usually symbolizes an awakening or a realization, and here it's used to show how she's becoming more and more aware of Neverland's true nature. And this is reiterated even further when she sees the face of the mysterious man who's been spraying extra moisture everywhere in every episode. We still don't know what the hell he's spraying, but she's the only one who has actually seen his face so far. And she isn't the only one waking up, as Wendy Holly finally comes back to life, with Dr. Silva being the one next to her, and this shows not only her maternal sense of guilt, but also shows how she's the only one that truly sees her as human. However, that sentiment is completely lost on Wendy, who doesn't even wake her up. She yet again hears those insect-like screeching sounds from the ovomorph, which seems to be calling out to her at this point, given that the only nearby drone is lacking some pretty critical neck support. We then see the many experiments that Prodigy is conducting on its new assets, including Kirsch and Curly's dissection of an endomorph. And this is where we yet again see Holly's adaptation of Ridley Scott's iconic retro-futuristic style as she pulls out the good old handy cam that looks like it's straight out of the late 70s, but it includes details that we see on modern camera mounts and broadcast cameras. When he slices into this egg and exposes the facehugger through the transparent embryo membrane, we can see it come to life through what looks like practical effects and animatronics. Now, the Alien movies not only featured some of the best practical effects of their time, but they arguably raised the standard for practical effects in general. So seeing the facehuggers like this really brings the franchise back to its roots. Now, the other corporate asset that they're experimenting on is Joe, whose lung is being used to incubate a xenomorph fetus. Now, clearly this is not something that Joe consented to, which just goes to show how much control corporations have in this late-stage capitalistic nightmare. It's actually something that actor Samuel Blanken mentioned about Boy in a recent interview with Collider, specifically when he was talking about his relationship with Hermit, saying, "So technically I own him, and that might mean that I kind of own parts of his body as well. He gets what he wants in a very specific way with Hermit, in a way that is not the same with Wendy."
Well, I thought his name was Joe.
Well, it is, or at least that's his real name. Hermit, however, seems to be his call sign, which explains why it was stitched into his jacket in the previous 2 episodes. Both of them have 2 different names, one for their real self and one for the identity given to them by Prodigy. Boy's sense of entitlement to his employees' body parts shows him as a true dark reflection of his own creation. He is fully human, but he sees other human beings as corporate assets that he himself owns and can fully exploit for profit in the worst ways. Holly specifically wanted Boy to be a physical embodiment of the corrupt capitalist themes that we see throughout the Alien franchise, mixing in aspects of the Silicon Valley Boy King type CEOs that we see today. And this moment is one of the best examples we have seen of this yet. After Wendy finally reaches the lab and passes out on the floor, we hear Metallica's "Wherever I May Roam" playing as the episode closes out. Now, the song is about finding a home with endless freedom and exploration, which feels incredibly ironic given everything we've seen this episode, since no one is free other than the Prodigy of Prodigy Corps himself. We continue to see just how small the world really is for the Lost Boys and how limited they are, not by their own ability, but by the corporation that controls their lives. They were pitched immortality and superpowers to sell them on the idea of becoming hybrids, but only because Prodigy knew that literal children would not read the fine print and would give away their privacy without even realizing it. And the same can be said for Joe, Kirsch, and all the researchers in Neverland. The only person who has the freedom to explore anything is Boy Cavalier. So the use of Metallica's song here almost feels like as if it's taunting the victims of his unchecked aspirations. Well guys, that's everything we caught in episode 3, but what did you think? Big shout out to Dodd Sides who wrote this video. You can find his social links below, and if there's anything we missed, you know where to find us. You know, we're on Twitter, Threads, we're on Discord. We have a Discord, we're in the comments. We're probably showing this video live. I'll talk to you when it's live. There's a lot of stuff around there. So, you know, let us know what you think and smash the button and all that stuff. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.